you all for coming along for tonight's online talk. It's the first one we've had in quite a while, actually. I think since the pandemic, well, not the pandemic stopped, but all the restrictions got lifted. Kind of we've returned back to in-house talks in the gallery. But actually, the online talks work really well, you know, and they were a really good resource for people to kind of catch up on YouTube and stuff like that. So so that's one good thing that came out of that nightmare year or two. So so I thought it'd be good to kind of carry on the online talks some more. Yeah, so our current exhibition then is Memory into Landscape, and this came about really from the lockdowns, I suppose. I think quite a lot of people during that time got kind of bored being cooped up in the house and started going for long walks and maybe exploring areas of their surroundings which they normally wouldn't have done. I certainly did. I was holed up in Buryport, where I was living at the time, which is just along the south coast of Wales, in between Swansea and Carmarthen. And so I started looking for the local Iron Age fort, which I found on an old map and I didn't know existed in Buryport. So I went looking for it. I spent 2 days looking for it and found it behind behind the cemetery and sort of in amongst a housing estate. So the top of it was still there, but it was completely surrounded by the cemetery, these houses, and then some farmers' fields. And so the only way you could access it was sort of like sneaking over this old fence and going through all these brambles and actually making your way up onto the top of it. But it was still there and protected. I managed to fall off the fort, and I sprained my ankle quite badly. I ended up bedridden for another 2 weeks. I managed to crawl my way back to the house. So that was my exploration of Buryport Iron Age fort. But kind of this idea, basically this idea of like kind of looking at the land a different way and maybe following routes which you normally wouldn't go down, and that sort of kind of was the starting point for all of this. Also the idea of kind of landscape as well, and how that triggers memory. So even though I'm from North Wales, which is got some of the most beautiful landscape in the whole world, I grew up in Shropshire, so the Shropshire Hills and the Longmins and all that area, you know, was very spoilt, and kind of these are landscapes that mean a lot to me, and then kind of over the years kind of fed into my own artwork in some ways. And so I all of this kind of come together to kind of really come up with a show which kind of looked at all this and what this means. So Rob, who I knew kind of spent half his life up on mountains in all weathers, drawing and painting. But Rob's work, which I found the most interesting, the paintings would never end. They would actually, you'd see them one year, and then maybe it'd be 5 years later, I'd see the same painting, but the clouds would have actually moved a bit in them as he's added to them. Or the rock, some greenery would actually have grown on a bit of rock on the right-hand corner. So it felt like they were actually slowly evolving the same rate as the rocks and the plant life on these mountains he was painting. So that sort of interested me. And yes, and Kathryn, kind of who I knew from years before at Olry on Merthyr, that kind of whose role with the National Trust at Newton House and Duneva, and the landscape around there. So we were very lucky to go and explore the landscape around there and kind of look at that really. So yeah, I'm going to stop wittering. So the idea of tonight then is that some of the artists who are in the exhibition will briefly talk about their work and their work in the show, and then sort of after that, maybe Rob and Kathryn, if you want to, maybe talk a little bit about the selection process, and then maybe there can be a wider just kind of chat about the themes really, you know, landscape and memory and things like that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna say that Penn is the second in command. So if I have to pop out just for a minute, I'll let you know. Okay. There we go. So who wants to go first? Lucien, yeah?
Yeah, I can go first. That's fine.
There we go. I've made you co-hosts.
Great.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so if I can ask everyone, if you're not speaking, to put your mute button on. Okay. Okay, over to you, Lucien.
Great. Yeah. So I guess I'll start by talking a little bit about my own practice. Unfortunately, Connie can't be here because she's currently in Australia. She just landed a few hours ago, so I think it'd be best if she didn't participate. But yeah, so my practice has always kind of investigated ideas around like tinkering and problem solving. I've always really been interested in like do-it-yourself mentality and resilience and resourcefulness, but kind of always quite low key. So making do and mending. So my work's always had a kind of quite a rudimentary feel to it. A lot of the processes I use are quite kind of basic in terms of woodwork, metalwork, using found objects, things from like the everyday. And I guess there's always also been an element of kind of storytelling involved in that as well. And yeah, problem solving. So, I mean, Connie and I have been talking for a while about this idea of kind of adventurers and explorers and frontiers, and like a frontier mentality where you end up in an environment where you have to sort of survive and solve problems as you go along, in terms of like shelter and mobility and yeah. So when this project came up, we'd already talked for a while about the idea of building a boat, and we'd been looking a lot at sort of Kibbo Kift and Shackleton. We've both been reading quite a lot about floods as well, and that kind of fed in. And we in both our practices, I think there's like an element of kind of amateurism as well. And yeah, it just sort of all fell into place. We were interested in it was predominantly in this project, I think it's the kind of the storytelling. We're both interested in creating a work that sort of suggests a person's presence or you know, a kind of an area where there's been an activity. So the work that we did for this show, I think we've tried to kind of instill a sense of there being a kind of occupation of it. There's a sort of things have happened. The boat's arrived. There's a pile of kind of pyrolized bread, which suggests maybe kind of the coming and going of people, having fires, baking, eating. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've been talking a lot as well about like time in terms of, I mean, I've always been a huge fan of kind of Vonnegut, and we were talking. He describes time as a kind of he describes a kind of alien race where they view time differently to humans, and it's viewed like a landscape, so they can see any moment in a person's existence like simultaneously, and he describes it as a landscape. And I'd also been looking at Andres Snare Magnusson's book about time and water, and he talks a lot about landscape, and he particularly focuses on melting glaciers in Iceland. And his whole kind of interest is in the kind of parallel between storytelling and shifting landscapes. And I think, yeah, this project kind of, it's very much a starting point, what we're exhibiting at Elysium. But I think it kind of, all these ideas kind of met in the middle. So we were looking at kind of how a changing landscape might shift narratives. And so we were imagining a sort of scenario where there'd been a flood. I mean, Connie's favorite film is Waterworld. The jury's out for me of whether it's actually worth watching or not, but it's this idea that the entire planet is covered in water. So yeah, we've been looking at the idea of flood. We'd imagined this scenario where these two people are trying to sort of navigate this world of like coming and going, tides, cycles, yeah, and sort of, yeah, we're just interested in kind of building a narrative around kind of a shifting landscape. We were both kind of really interested, we both still are very interested in kind of outdoor activities and adventure, and it kind of, there's a whole movement around make your own gear, and again that fed in. So Connie made the quilt, I built the boat. Neither of us are kind of experts in what we were attempting to do, kind of fairly yeah, this kind of idea of the amateur. So it was kind of imagining two people trying to navigate this new landscape, and kind of problem solve, make do what they had, fix things, yeah, and exist in it. Yeah, and I guess the idea of the project is that it will sort of develop from here. So we are actually going to try and float the boat at some point and maybe try and stay on it overnight, perhaps later next year potentially, or and try and develop the project so the objects that we've made become kind of artifacts as well. So they all develop their own kind of narratives, and as they are used, they are modified and adapted and worn, broken, repaired. And so kind of the landscapes that we're inhabiting and traveling across are also impacting ultimately how the work is shaped and how the aesthetic of the work as well, I suppose. But yeah, when this project came up, it really was a kind of light bulb moment, really. Everything sort of fell into place. Like Connie had been reading a lot about Doggerland. We looked up the statistics on climate change, on which areas are going to flood first. And unfortunately, Swansea's pretty high up the list. So yeah, it just sort of made sense really to start this project here, I think. And it's been really interesting developing it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cheers, Lucien. Has anyone got any questions, or should we leave the questions till sort of after the quick artist presentations? Yeah, I'll take that as a yeah. There we go. All right then. Cheers, Lucien. Okay, Nikta, how about you? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, I'm Nikta Mohammadi. I made the film that was in the Memory into Landscape exhibition called Windcatcher and Gargoyles. Yeah, the way the film, I mean, it was really interesting to just hear Jonathan right now talk about like the kind of starting place for the themes of exhibition. I wasn't aware of a lot of these things when I applied, but actually the process of developing and creating this film was pretty much in line with that kind of trajectory, because well, basically I kind of moved from London to West Yorkshire, Hebden Bridge, in the middle of lockdown. in 2020, which was a really massive shift in my landscape and surroundings. And in kind of like a really strange time to move to a little village as well, because everyone, I couldn't really connect with people, so all I could do was just taking really long walks and kind of exploring this like very new and strange surroundings, and like taking really long walks and exploring landscapes around here, and that's kind of where when the idea was born for the film. My practice is more or less kind of focused on film and moving image, but I am one of those people who does a little bit of everything and kind of venture into like text and performance and sound and photography a little bit. But some of the themes I've always kind of worked with are kind of movement and displacement, and also the sort of blurred lines between fiction and documentary, or kind of public and private. But after that move from London to Hebden Bridge, something that was kind of new and added to my practice was the landscape, really, and the Yorkshire landscape, which is very beautiful and engulfing, but also like a little bit haunting as well. And especially at the time when I moved here and the sort of headspace I was in, which was like very much isolated. So that like really kind of impacted the way I approached this film. I created the film. A lot of the film is made with stills, because, as I said, the idea of the film was born when I was just taking long walks in the woods or in the moors around here, and I often would have my camera with me and just take photos. So the story of the film is almost like what I was kind of going through, but like maybe a little bit like surreal, crazy version of like my walks in the woods and in the moors with my camera, and just kind of taking photos and sometimes spooking myself a little bit. But also, I think what's really interesting about the theme and the name of this exhibition, Memory into Landscape, is also the word memory as well, because walking in this landscape and exploring this landscape, I would subconsciously also kind of, I was also kind of engaging with the concept of being a stranger as well, and being a stranger to the landscape, and kind of bringing some ghosts to this landscape that maybe weren't really native to this landscape, and kind of almost imprinting some of those ghosts and some of those memories, and some of those foreign words into this landscape, which I guess is also kind of one of the central themes and ideas of the film. I kind of got a lot of inspiration from a costume from a belief system from south of Iran. I'm from Iran, so this costume kind of personifies the wind as a character that can possess humans, and that's really interesting because the wind is also a very important element in Yorkshire, in West Yorkshire, where I am. So basically, in this belief system, it's called Zar. The wind can possess human and like kind of make them do things. So that idea of kind of natural elements, or like elemental creatures, and like then kind of taking that from Zar as a like kind of a costume from like south of Iran and like various parts of Africa as well. and then bringing that and mixing that with a lot of like kind of place tales from Yorkshire, from Calderdale, West Yorkshire, was also kind of part of the process of making the film. I guess another important part of the process is also using stills and using photography to tell the story. So the majority of the film is made from stills rather than video. I guess that decision was partly because of what I said, because I was in those walks that I was taking, I was having my camera and I would just take photos, and also the kind of relationship that there is between photos and stills and memory and ghosts. But at the same time, there was also like a little bit of a bit of decision, because it was just, in some ways, it was easier to do it that way, production wise, to do it through photographs and video. And I guess that's always kind of part of the artistic process, like necessities that you kind of have to take into consideration, and then maybe turn them also to creative choices. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it as a short intro for the work.
Brilliant, thank you, Nikta. Okay, Sara, should we do yours?
Yeah, that's great, Jonathan. Are you happy to share the slides?
Yeah, so.
Thank you. I've got some images of the works. I've got a series of 5 paintings that are in the exhibition, and I wasn't quite sure whether everyone here tonight would have actually seen the show, so it seemed to make sense to just share the work here as well, so you got a bit of a sense as to what I'm talking about here. So I live and work in Somerset, and this body of works was actually made already, so I put the dates on them so you can see, and they were just such a perfect fit for the whole curation and exhibition concept and the idea of memory into landscape, because they're all made with earth paints and pigments that I've collected along the Somerset coast, which is immensely varied, and I think that all of the cliff faces towards the west end of the Somerset coast have the most amazing red rocks and seams of alabaster and all that kind of thing, and they actually date right back to when it was desert. And you know, it's kind of quite mind-blowing actually to walk along that coast and see the stratas of time. And there's a huge rift, kind of chasm that sits just slightly to the east of Watchet, where there's almost 0.5 kilometre of shift in geological time as you walk along that coast. So you go along a bit of muddy beach, and one side is Triassic and one side is Jurassic. And it's quite extraordinary to think about all the time that's captured within those rocks, and the memories that they hold, I guess. So that's the kind of deep time stuff. But also, as you walk up the coast up towards Bristol, up the Severn Estuary, up the Somerset coast, you come along to really expansive mudflats, and the sand dunes and things that are there between Burnham on Sea and going up towards Weston-super-Mare. And that's incredibly rich feeding grounds for all kinds of bird life. I do some bird counting actually for the Wetland Bird Survey, which I love. And the migratory birds come in huge numbers, thousands, many thousands at this time of year. And they're obviously feeding on the silt. So the image you've got here, this is actually the first one, Dynamic Equilibrium 1, and it's called Stone Dialogue. So these were made in a series using the stone and the rock as a motif. The paints that are there have been made using Severn Estuary mud. For those of you who are familiar with Richard Long's mud paintings, you'll recognize the color. It's exactly the same stuff. So he also collected it from the Severn Estuary there as well. I think it's, for me now, it's become quite an iconic color. But it was just exploring that idea of the kind of silt layer that is highly nutritious right now, very fertile kind of resource that's really feeding the current ecology, but it's also the next layer of geological time that's being laid down, and I'm quite interested in what's going into it. Yeah, by all means, move it on, Jonathan. You just flick through. That's great, thank you. So I was actually playing around with mixing some other, I allowed myself two things actually. I allowed myself some white gesso and some black Indian ink to mix into the pigments that I was collecting from along the coast. And it was a kind of residency. It was the first time that I was exploring and experimenting with this idea of a sporadic nomadic residency, because prior to lockdown, and so you can see these works are all 2020, 2021. So right in the thick of the kind of COVID pandemic lockdowns and all the social distancing and everything else. And I'd been an artist who had generally been out and about seeking out really remote islands and mountains and that kind of thing to go and do residencies on, getting to wild places. And suddenly I was kind of grounded in a way back in Somerset. And I kind of like the idea that if I couldn't go to the residency could come to me. And this was my bit of local coast. And there was obviously periods when I couldn't even get to the coast from where I was. But the idea of the kind of nomadic, sporadic residency where I was just going to arrive at the coast, engage with people, collect some earth pigments, take people out on a walk with me as well, discuss and explore that coast, explore all the kind of history of time at a kind of macro level and also a micro level, and those sort of states of change that occur twice a day with the changing tides going out and the tides coming in again. And the project I was working on, I was actually working with Somerset Wildlife Trust, and I was really fortunate to be working with a marine ecologist as well as a couple of geologists as well, and some other artists. And it was the marine ecologist who introduced me to this idea of dynamic equilibrium, and the idea that nature always finds itself back in a place of equilibrium, no matter how short that period of disruption has been. As I say, whether it's tidal shifts or whether it's rising sea levels and the kind of bigger macro states of change that we're experiencing right now. And I thought that was amazing, actually. That was quite a big moment for me, this kind of idea of dynamic equilibrium and realizing just how far away from it we are as humans. That idea of kind of being able to flex and change with the circumstances, and how resistant to change we are and how fixed we are, and sort of the ludicrousness of the amount of the Somerset coast, which is actually now fortified with sea defences, and the aspects that are defended and the aspects that are not defended, and what's permanent and what's not, and our kind of need to possibly be slightly more humble in the state of kind of geological time. We're only occupying it for a tiny little section. This idea of aspiring towards something which is more of a state of dynamic equilibrium really interests me. Can we just go back, Jonathan, just to one or two of the others? Because I think it might be just, yeah, that's good. Hang on, they keep scrolling right through. Do you want to just, yeah, anyway, that's a nice one. So some of these pieces were working using, as I say, like the rock as a motif. So I was picking up and collecting some of the rocks from the shore as well, and layering them in different ways as well, and kind of mobilizing them, making something which I guess is often used as a metaphor for permanence, the idea of the rock, and making it into something which is also something which is in a constant state of change by the edge of the coast, constantly in a state of erosion. And as I was working with these kind of motifs as well, and kind of taking something very apparently solid and making it something very, very ghostly, and very transient, that things began to emerge, you know. So I like to work in quite a responsive way. So there were pieces like this that for me became sort of slightly lung-like, and kind of talked to that idea of the ocean being the lungs of the planet, and kind of picking up and weaving in sort of narratives and stories about the stuff that I was learning about the sea as well. And there is quite a lot of, I would say, quite a lot of craftsmanship in these. So for me, painting with and making my own earth pigments is a slow painting. It's very slow because you've got to go and do all the walks, research, collect all of the pigments as well. And most of the time I do those walks with volunteers, who really inform and help me to understand. So I've got a geologist that I work with who's brilliant at actually helping me to understand the technical details as well. But the idea that you then collect it, process it, experiment with it, turn it into paint. I've recently started making pastels as well, which is a whole nother level up from making paint. But actually the whole process and the creation of the paint is a slow process, and it's a thinking process, and it's that lovely kind of traditional relationship between craftsman and craft object, and the sort of slow pace of it is actually very beautiful and a counterpoint to the kind of digital world and the instant editing of images, digital media stuff, that actually part of that slow process of making the paint and making the paintings helps them to evolve and to become something greater than some of their parts. So yeah, I probably better shut up actually, Jonathan, because I could probably talk for hours about these and let somebody else have a go. But yeah, so the other thing I would just quickly say is that beautiful terracotta color there, that is the red of the cliffs at the west end of Somerset, and the grey, very neutral, very soft tones of the kind of mud and the silt of the Severn Estuary. That characterizes just that short span of coast, which is like literally one end of Somerset to the other. And I think it's quite extraordinary that geological variance that we've got here, yet how it is echoed, that very same geology, you know, the seams of it that run right across the planet as well. You know, we're all standing on the same rock. It shares those memories, it catches those memories as well. But yeah, so these have become quite anthropomorphic as well, and they're deliberately designed to be read at a number of different levels. Thank you, Jonathan. That one's quite shroudy. I quite like that one. Became like a sort of shrouded figure that I quite like, that sort of buried in the mud, a kind of ghostly form. Yeah, sorry. I don't want to take up everybody's time. But yeah, so these kind of, as I say, these sort of lung-like shapes as well, and the kind of trace through. Actually, interestingly, this is just a bit of technical craft stuff as well. The line work that's on them is actually, that's the thick mud paint, which is very particle rich. And what I found was that the best tool for applying it is actually seagull feathers that you pick up on the beach as well. Those really big seagull feathers, because it clogs anything else. You can't use a traditional quill. You can't use a brush even to put on those fine things, because it just doesn't hold the paint in the same way. So I kind of quite like finding the answers and the solutions to the technical problems through what nature presents us with. And I find that most of the time,
Okay.
Well, I was really enjoying hearing what everyone else was saying, and what you were saying there, Sara, about the way your work is rooted in the place and grows out of it, and the geological formation of that place. And it made me think of what I wanted to start with saying was that I live in the sort of mid-South Wales, so it's just on the lower edge of Powys, which runs through the heart of Wales. And the nearest town is called Crickhowell, but my village is called Llangattock, and it's under a kind of escarpment that is the dividing line between predominantly agricultural land and predominantly industrial land, going down into the South Valleys and the coal fields, and then going down to the coast. And it was kind of an accident that I ended up living here. It just was a house happened to be free that I could afford, but it's ended up being an incredibly special place for me, with that demarcation between a sort of a very different feel of countryside. And when you come over the escarpment and look down towards Llangattock, it looks just like the most beautiful landscape of hills and a lake, and incredibly beautiful. And I live just near a canal, which is the most visited tourist attraction in the Brecon Beacons National Park. And I live between the canal and a river, the River Usk, which is very lovely, but it just happens to be the most polluted river in Wales in terms of phosphates. And just another very special feature of the escarpment, a massive caving system that's still only being discovered. It was discovered quite relatively recently, and it's still really uncharted territory. So all these different elements have become incredibly important to the way that I work. And I've done things like found myself drawn into things like following installation of microhydro schemes and charting that, and then making a work about it, but not in a documentary way. It's really important to me that it's something very personal, that I tap into the way things feel as I observe them or move amongst them. Another thing that I did was follow massive industrial, what would it be, restoration of the canal, but it's restoration that I just had no idea that the canal that is seen as so picturesque, it's actually, to keep it a navigable canal, it's packed with concrete, polypropylene, plastic, the whole, all this sort of secret life of the Black Mountains, where these industries are incredibly live, and the tourism industry is very keen on seeing industry as our historic legacy, and it's very charming, and there's a lot of money to be made by it, and visiting the old ironworks, and well, the canal is the industrial, the lime kilns and the tramways that make it such a wonderful place to come and visit. But there's this secret life of ongoing industry that is at real odds with the more easy perceptions. And so so that where I live has really made a big difference to the way I work. And for a long time, I'd been looking for a way of using the idea of a myriorama. And I was given a myriorama when I was a child, and I don't know, probably just a very casual gift that didn't really hit home with me for a long time. But a myriorama is usually a set of small cards, maybe about 7 inches by 3 inches, usually about 16 cards of landscape, but designed in such a way that they can be rearranged in a nearly endless variety of ways. And the one that I was given was made in 1824, and it was the first one made in the UK, because the myriorama was the first, I don't know, it was first invented, I suppose, in Paris, I think, in France anyway. And so I'd been looking for a way of using this way of seeing the land and transferring it to this, the picturesque and the romantic elements of where I live in the Black Mountains, but incorporating into that all these much more mysterious or hidden elements or jarring elements to that way of seeing it. So like a lot of people have been saying, like Jonathan started just his adventures in lockdown. Lockdown gave me the chance to just sink into thinking about the myriorama in terms of the Black Mountains, from more or less Merthyr Tydfil to more or less Abergavenny, so a stretch of land which, like Sara, I couldn't always get to all those places, but at various points it was possible to bring those in. And so what I did was do a series of 12 drawings and scaling up those tiny little 7-inch cards to 7 foot, well, 7'2" by 2'6", and those are the works that are in the show. And they in the drawings, I've included things that were really hard to see, as well as things that are really very strongly visible. So that there are massive features from our industrial heritage that are very striking. And then there are objects that I've found around those sites that would be, you know, very, very easy just to walk past. But I've kind of, they have the same status as the massive landmarks. So maybe one of them is a very worn out cricket ball, I think. And then that's got as much importance, as much resonance for me as I hold it, as these sort of iconic structures. And even so, and I think the drawings mingle something of that feeling of being on the edge of industry and agriculture. So one of the objects is, I think it's a fence tensioner, and in it are tiny little hairballs that sheep have coughed up on the path. And so it was a really special time for me, walking and looking and sort of dreaming, and then going back and doing these drawings. And I just loved, I was so thrilled with the way they looked in the exhibition, and the way they fitted with everyone else's work, with Lucien, and with that boat project that you were describing, Lucien, that you did together, and the way that then feeds into it just changes my drawings in a way that gives me huge pleasure. And the way, if Caroline was here, I wish Caroline could have been here as well. But the way that her Cretaceous, the work responding to Cretaceous land, has really shifted the way my work responding to Carboniferous, I think are we, coal here, the way they sort of like shift each other around, that's been a real pleasure to me. And the other thing that has given me pleasure is that that each time the series is shown, different things come out of it, and the different order, the different well, it's just basically the different order. There's one thing that I was sorry about, a little bit sad about, and that was that my intention was to go down to Swansea periodically, or get someone else to do it, like Jonathan, to change the drawings in the order, just to demonstrate that the thing that you can do with the little Myriorama cards. Yeah, but there'll be chance for that, and I've made an animation which I could show now, but maybe it just feels maybe I won't screen share, but I will probably put it on you know, on my website or on Instagram or something, just to show something of that element of the interchangeability of the drawings. So I think that's it. You can also see what a Myriorama is if you just Google Myriorama, and it might be said Myriorama, I don't know, but it's MYRIO Rama. This just means multiple views. So I've been thrilled to be part of this, and really enjoying what everyone says. So I think that'll do for me.
Thank you, Penny. Brilliant. I mean, just to put my 2 pence worth in, it really was such a lovely show to put up, and there was a worry at the time, I think from the selectors, from Rob and Kathryn, oh, maybe there's too much, because a lot of the works are actually quite big, as in they take up a lot of space, except for maybe Isabella's. But the thing I love about it is, especially, it is actually, it all works so well together, and it does create a very strange kind of landscape, a very kind of a strange environment, especially when you walk through Caroline's sort of portal. You know, it greets you as you come into the gallery, and then you walk in, and then suddenly it feels like you're in a different world. And you've got the smell of the coal, I think it's coal, coming from the boat piece. You can hear Isabella's kind of film in the distance with the just the very calming kind of sound of the river and the birds tweeting, stuff like that. And then you can hear Nikta's kind of film. It has its quiet moments, and suddenly it sparks to life with the music. And it really is a lovely show just to sit in and kind of take in. The gallery is very cold, so you don't want to stay there for too long. But it really is. It's just got a really kind of beautiful vibe about it. And yeah, I just wanted to say that really. Rob, I was just wondering if you fancied saying a few words about the selection, but also because Isabella's not here, maybe kind of a few words about that as well, about the river piece, because you knew the area, didn't you, where she recorded it, I think?
Yeah, yes, at least I think I do. Yeah, I mean, thinking about how we selected the show, of course, generally, 500 and odd applicants were, you know, I mean, to narrow that down in the way we did was quite a task. And using Sara's term of dynamic equilibrium, in a way, we're aiming to compose a show that's got that kind of dynamic equilibrium with work that complements and so forth, and opens up different facets of the theme. And I think Isabella's work, I mean, if you compare Isabella to Nikta, Isabella's work video is very contemplative. It's a kind of an extended sort of almost mesmeric contemplation of the River Teivi. And the thing that sense of recognition that one knows that river, one's seen that river, it comes across in the film. And I think rivers have their own particular character and personality in many ways. I mean, I grew up near the Thames, and the way that flows, the mass of it, the width of it, the depth of it, the play of light on it, its surroundings, is very distinctive. And the Teivi equally has a particular character that's quite different from the Towie, and so on. And that sense of intimacy with the location, with the river, I think it comes across brilliantly in that video, which is very contemplative. And the use of the actual ambient sound as well was very interesting. And as you listen to it, there's a certain point well into the video where you start to feel you can hear human voices, which is really strange, because sometimes when you're by water, I've oftentimes been by water flowing through rocks, and you think you can actually hear the babble of voices now and again, which comes and goes. And then you hear these sort of ghostly voices, and they sound like voices that are just drowned in the water from somewhere or from the past. And then that disappears, and then further on, the voices are a bit louder, and you know, those kinds of ambiguities and the way that things flow into other things in that, it's a very spellbinding piece. And Nikita's, on the other hand, has got this kind of very rich narrative with all sorts of incidents and symbolism, and sort of, you know, there's this grand sort of structure of going up from a valley town onto a kind of hills and going towards the sky, and all sorts of things that happen on that journey, and then the journey back down. And it's very busy and active. And I think those two pieces sort of as video pieces, complemented each other very well indeed. And I think, you know, we wanted things that would play off one another. So Caroline's outrageous Cretaceous, for instance, provided a colourful, very striking portal, as it were, for entering the show in a sense. And you know, you get work that's very intimate, and thinking of Sara's kind of long-term investigation of materials, the synthesis of materials, the working of them over periods of considerable time and intimacy with the place, to realize the pieces that have got some very subtle relationships going on. And then we've got Penny's very monumental drawings, and I think this Miriorama idea, which I'd never come across before, the idea that you can keep recomposing these drawings to make different compositions, was a brilliant idea. And I think that makes a very striking aspect of the show. And Lucien and Connie's sort of sense of improvising your own survival in the climate disaster, as it were, and that linking with timeless sort of myths and accounts of the flood, the biblical flood, and other kind of mythological sort of references to ancient floods and so forth. And the idea that we're going full circle, and that this is something we can, that human destiny is somehow bound up with these catastrophic events. And the idea that how do you respond to that, and the idea that you would respond to it in some way piecemeal, as it were. You'd you know, the idea of improvising some way of continuing without actually having an end point to that in mind. You know, so it's very so all of these pieces, I think, kind of add to that, you know, the sort of dynamic equilibrium builds, as it were, through the show. And that's what we really were very pleased to see, the way that work looked in the space. And I think Jonathan and his team made a great job of actually installing it all. And I think it does, hopefully, I think everyone would agree, it makes a coherent but diverse show with many sensibilities at play.
It's very meditative. It's very much like you go out for a walk and you kind of taking in all these, you know, different sounds and everything. The show is actually like that, and strangely sits out like that. So, like, say you stood in the middle of the gallery, Penny's drawings almost act as like the far distance, don't they? And you know, and offers almost like that. Obviously, they're a bit more than just background paintings, like, you know, like a, you know, old-fashioned, you know, painting a background to a film or something. But it is a bit like that, and kind of almost like, you know, you go around the corner to sort of Nikta's film, and it's almost like you're going into the Underland. Then you are actually going somewhere a bit darker, a bit more sinister, where things aren't quite what they seem, you know. Yeah, I'm very happy with it. It's great. It's great.
Yes, it's certainly a show that takes you on a journey, which is what landscape does, you know, and it's a journey both in space and time. I think that's the important thing, and I think it fitted the theme very well indeed.
Yeah, and Kathryn, have you got anything to add about the selection process?
Well, no, Rob's really summed it up, actually. But it was such a interesting time selecting, because there was so much work to see, and to sort of to find the pieces that we found out of that sort of whole sea of work there was really difficult, but also somehow those things bobbed up to the surface, both sort of aesthetically, but also in terms of theme. And we kept looking back to the call out that we put out to try and make sure we were kind of addressing those things about landscape, time and memory with the works that we were kind of selecting. And I think all the works in that gallery really speak to that theme very directly. And I think that's one of the reasons they kind of resonate off each other so well, is that they're really looking at those ideas of land and survival, and all of them are touching on the sort of climate crisis, either directly or indirectly, I think, or sort of just making reference to that, even if it's quite it's not explicit, it's kind of there, you know. But I also love these ideas of people coming to landscapes, like Nikita's work, you know, where you're kind of bringing something completely different and layering it on top of a landscape. And Penny's probably doing the same thing there as well, because you're coming from somewhere else and bringing it to a landscape. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well. But then you get something like Isabella's, where you can sense a deep kind of relationship to a landscape, where she's just kind of felt confident to just allow that river to just speak of itself and in itself without sort of asking anything else of it, I suppose. So all of these sort of different approaches were just so fascinating, really, to how you're going to unpack that story of time, memory, and landscape, I guess. But then I'm so impressed with the curation and installation in the gallery. I just think it's beautiful, actually. Jonathan knows that gallery so well now, I suppose, that it's, I know what that's like, having worked in galleries. You get a very intimate sort of understanding of a space and how things will kind of work within it. But this sense of kind of going through art views, actually, and that gallery particularly works like that because it's on levels as it is, but you can kind of view through things to other things and then enter spaces. And it's got that sense, I think, like you said, Jonathan, of underworld, or kind of, viewing points that really sort of do take you on a journey. So I think it's, I just think it's an amazing show, and I'm really proud of it, actually. And congratulations to all the artists.